So we're looking specifically at health science, but we can apply some of the ideas across to the other disciplines, because we're after all talking about writing about research. Yeah, just that our example today will be an article from the health science. So I'm Kui Hoon and Kenneth, we're both from SIT. So you know why we are here, to talk a little bit about how to use the genre-based approach to decode, that means to understand and to kind of dissect a research article, right? And along the way, we will talk about the textual organization and the linguistic features that make up this, research article. Okay, talk about their functions. This is the article that we're using. You can access it by using the QR code so that you can see the examples more clearly from your phone. Okay. So it's about a randomized controlled trial on the benefits of a ketogenic diet on quality of life and so on. All right, so we'll come back to this again, no worries. Yeah, so a couple of things. We'll look first at what genre-based analysis is, and then tie that to voice and stance. Then we'll look at the different sections of a research article, pinpointing specifically the textual organization and the linguistic functions. So first and foremost, according to Hyland is professor of applied linguistics. He says that genre refers to socially recognized ways in which we use language. And this varies according to the context. It varies according to your audience, the purpose for your writing, according to the situation that you're in. Genre is also underlying patterns, where words are used to organize texts and perform particular functions. In other words, as members of a discourse community, we recognize certain types of texts because of these recurring features. The way that a text is organized, why it's organized this way, why does it sound this way, why does it look this way. Yeah. So we will be focusing then on what we call the rhetorical structure, the way that information is organized and the way that language functions. The language features, the functions, tie that to voice and stance. In particular, the writer. Okay, why does the writer convey meaning a certain way, or through the writing, what meaning is the writer conveying? So that's our voice and stance. Okay, so first voice, let me tell you what voice is. It's about identity. Voice is about ownership of the information. Yeah, we can have what we call the authorial voice. So the author's voice or the individual voice. For example, me as the writer, I will tell you that I am owning my information by using words like mine. Or if I have my colleagues with me in the team, I'll say, this is our work, right? So we are claiming authorship. And we are showing you our contribution to the body of knowledge, okay? Then we have the social voice. Social voice as in, now I see myself as a member of the discipline, right? I'm a member of this discipline, this discourse community, and so I want to draw some distance and tell you my authority in giving you this information is because I'm a member of this community. So the social voice then indicates objectivity, yeah? And lastly, you've got dialogic voice, where the writer includes the reader in their writing. Okay? So as the writer is writing, he or she is saying, okay, my reader may be thinking this, so let me answer these questions. Yeah? So here we have some examples. The authorial, which is very straightforward. If you look at the social, we use things like passive verbs, nominalizations, personifications, and the there clause. So here is your passive, it is estimated that, which draws distance rather than saying we estimate that, right? But because it is a common feature, a recurring feature in this kind of writing, authors that want to establish themselves in this field, they will use the same patterns. Despite the growing evidence of possible anti-tumor benefits, right? Very long noun clause, noun phrase. So you have something like this as well, nominalization. Within group analysis, showed. So showed is a verb that we use usually with human beings, right? We show, because the data is just the data. It's how we read the data. So this is taken as if the analysis is a human person. Okay? And then lastly, there are still some concerns. There are. So it's not just us saying it, but out there are the concerns. So it shows again, me as a member of this community. And then lastly, the dialogic voice, where you have a combination of voices. So the example I picked from Kudabachi is this: consistent with the outcomes of previous studies, our results revealed, so this is the authorial, the individual voice, right? Our results revealed that the KD had no adverse effect. High levels of ALP in breast cancer patients is a negative prognostic marker, often indicating progression of this. Okay, and then you've got the citation, which shows again, the community in this, right? The discipline, drawing on what other people have done. Then more research is needed. So again, that distance. So just within here, it's like the authors are saying, maybe my readers may be thinking, yeah, okay, so you've got these outcomes, and we know this about high levels of ALP. So what? So the next line is more research is needed in anticipation of what the readers will say. Okay, so this is the dialogic voice. And then in terms of stance is in a way my position. This is my stand, this is my stance. And we're looking at how authors show their attitude, how they evaluate the opinions of other people. Okay, whether it's positive, negative feelings and attitudes that they have towards something that's said or done in the field, whether they expected or did not expect the information. Is the information relevant? Is it important? How committed am I to this information? Yeah, and that is what we call the hedging and the boosting. So in order to show stance, you've got things like attitude markers, words that show what I think about something. So it's like we successfully did this, so it's an attitude marker, or they successfully found, right? Not just they found, or unfortunately, and so on and so forth. Showing opinion and some kind of evaluation. And then there's hedging, which is like less committed to something. So may, could, perhaps, these are words showing less of a commitment, or boosting on the other hand, which shows a higher level of commitment. Okay. But of course, you know also that the modal verbs like may, could, should, they show other meanings. Okay. So it really depends on how you read the entire text. It's not just about hedging, boosting when you see these words. They may be showing obligation, possibility, and so on. Okay? So here are some examples. We've got in the first one, perhaps in part is like double hedging. Perhaps is already quite weak, and then partly because it's right. The second one may reduce, could impact. Again, not that they are not certain, but they may not be so committed to the value of that information. And then here you've got according to our data, with some form of qualifying. So some sort of kind of like, it's not kind of the fact, but it's what our data says, according to our data. And the word suggest is also, showing attitude, right? It's positive, but it's also kind of neutral. It's definitely not negative attitude. Our data suggests. Yeah, so we're not coming down very strong to say this is what our data says, and it's proven by our data, kind of. Okay. Similarly, with the last one, we've got the term especially, feasible especially. All these show attitude marking as well. Yeah. Even tenses, like there are. That also, in a way, shows, they are quite certain about that fact. There are, right? And we'll talk more about tenses and the impact that tenses have on conveying meaning. So that's voice and stance. Throughout the sections of the research article, you will see the writers presenting themselves a certain way, showing their identity, showing their attitude, their position regarding information, other people's information as well as their own. So looking at the structure of the RA, I will look at the introduction and talk to you about how the introduction is structured by way of this metaphor, right, where you've got the territory, the niche, and an occupation, and then the methods by way of another metaphor. Then we come to findings and results, and then the conclusion, which Kenneth will take you through. So again, this, if you did not manage to get good about she. Okay, so intro and lit review. In Kodabakshi, the introduction and literature review are combined as one section. Okay, so we're looking at the two together. Some papers you may see an introduction with just background and a separate section called the lit review. Whichever way it is, the textual information, the organization, will be similar. So for this one, John Swales proposed this called the CARS model, which is create a research space. So if you think of the metaphor, like someone going out to survey a land, right? Because of the words territory and niche and occupying something. So it's like, going out and then seeing what's available out there, understanding what's available, and then seeing where the gap is so that you can come in to occupy that space. So this is what it is, create a research space. So it attempts to describe to us the organizational pattern. So this is how information is organized, right? By establishing a space within the research domain. So in order to do that, we need to first know what is in the research domain, what is in what Swales calls the territory. So we'll look at this in terms of moves and steps, right? And also the number of steps and why authors might choose to use one step over another. So in terms of a pictorial representation, the first move is the most general because it provides an overview, and then moving down towards more information about the research itself that becomes more specific. Okay, so I'll look at each of these moves with you. The first move is us establishing that territory. So to do this, the authors can claim centrality. Yeah, so maybe I can just highlight this. Authors will claim centrality and or make topics generalizations and or review items of previous research. And from Kodabakshi, we can see these. Step 1, claiming centrality, where the author says recently, KDs have gained the interest of cancer researchers. Right? So they claim that there is some importance in this, it's significant. And then despite the growing evidence of possible anti-human benefits, there's still some concerns about this. KDs are perceived as restrictive, alterations in physical cognitive function are pervasive, right? So this is some information about the topic. Yeah, still quite general, isn't it? And then comes the review of the literature to tell you quite specifically, what work has been done. And this is signaled by words like prior studies, results of 3 studies, and then of course you've got the citation, this in IEEE format, 9 to 11, the sources. To date, only 4 studies have assessed. So when we see words like these, we know that the authors are here reviewing the literature. Okay? And knowing first broad, and then what's happening in the field. When reviewing previous literature, we need to take note of the verb tenses that authors have used. Usually, the present simple is used to show that what's still currently deemed as being factual or acceptable as fact. So current, yeah. There are some concerns. Alterations are pervasive. Suggests to us that the authors accept this as the truth or as the facts. Okay. Past simple can be used to refer to specific past studies or to results that are non-supportive of some aspects of the author's work. It's something that the authors may not agree with. They might use the past, simple past, to indicate that. So here we've got only the first instance. We don't have examples showing the second one. So you've got the results of 3 studies lacked consistent findings, like just reporting, what they realized from these 3 studies. A small trial showed improvement, okay? And then the last tense that is quite common in review of literature is the use of the present perfect. Present perfect can refer to more recent findings or currently accepted state of affairs, or just to connect the past to the present to show that, because this is still part of the review, right? To show that, there's that continuation, yeah? So recently, KDs have gained, also in a way to show us that the authors, accept the current situation. Okay, so KDs have gained, studies have found, studies in the past and studies, continuing into the present. So studies have found this. Less fatigue has been reported. Whether active or passive voice has been reported as a passive voice doesn't matter. It's still the use of the present perfect tense. Okay? So verb tense is one thing to take note of when we are reading this section. The other thing to note is the use of reporting verbs and citations. So reporting verbs are verbs that we use to tell someone what has been said by somebody else, right? What's been found by somebody else. In this sample that we have, it's quite straightforward, almost neutral reporting verbs. They are not like very positive, very negative kind of reporting verbs. So found, reported, showed, okay? Suggested is interesting. It's kind of like other studies have suggested. Makes me wonder whether the authors, Kodabashi and colleagues, whether they accept this or not. It's just they have suggested. Okay. Highlighted is definitely more positive than they have found, or this is what they say. Yeah. So when we are writing, say we learn, right, because we're part of this discourse community, we learn from what they have written. When we are presenting, if we feel that something is something that I accept and I want to show you that this is my attitude, I'll use a stronger verb. Okay. And then we've got citations, both integral and non-integral. Integral citation is when we use the author's name in the sentence. For example, we say Kodabashi et al. Found. Right? So if I write that, then you know that I am attributing the information to that person, and I'm acknowledging that. Usually we do that when this is like an expert in the field, and we want to lend we want them to lend credibility or authority to what we say. Kodabashi, you realize, uses just non-integral citation throughout. So they have not used integral citation at all. Yeah? But that's not to say that they don't acknowledge the other authors. They do, the fact that they have citation. It's interesting to know, why do they focus on the information rather than attribute to other people? So maybe they want the readers to focus on the information. What is important is the information. Okay? So this is a kind of stylistic preference, I guess. All right, so these are two things that we take note of when we are establishing the territory. Yeah. Then we move on to move 2. After we've established that there is this significant space, right? We want to show how to establish a research gap. Yeah. By either counterclaiming, we can say, after we've said, this is what's happening, we can then come in to say, but. So we counterclaim, we challenge something that's been claimed, okay? Or we can indicate that there's a gap. So much has been done, but, okay, this hasn't been done. We may raise further questions, about what's been done, which then suggests that there is a gap, Or we can continue a tradition, pick up a suggestion by other people, and then continue that, right? Maybe extend that research. Koda Bakshi, they chose to do the final one by saying, when they say a recent systematic review has highlighted the need for additional larger investigations. And from there, if you look at the article, the next line is, the goal of our paper is, our goal, the goal of our research then is this, okay? So once they've done that, then they occupy that niche by showing the objective statement, right? Or showing the research question. So they can either outline the purposes or they can announce the present research. Kodabakshi and colleagues chose to take step 1A, which is outlining the purpose. We can see very clearly the goal of this present trial. Yeah. Step 2 and 3, we did not find in this paper, but it's possible in other papers you might come across where the authors just tell you the principal findings, okay, and tell you the structure of the rest of the paper. So if you're writing a very long report, like if it's a PhD dissertation, you know, your thesis, you very probably will have to take at least step 3. Okay, so this then concludes the introduction section, yeah? So after we've announced, after the authors have announced, you know, this is their goal, then they will have to tell us how they went about to achieve the goal, right? The method section is really an explanation section. It is where they have to show us, you know, the methods they use are rigorous to persuade us that the findings are credible, the findings are reliable. So it's also a very important section. Although in terms of writing, it's quite straightforward. In terms of reading, also quite straightforward. Okay, but I like first to just point out that across the disciplines, you've got method sections that are considered slow methods and some that are considered fast. Okay, so Bruce, he wrote about this. Fast methods are where the information is not as detailed. Okay, so if you're reporting on some standard procedure, you don't have to give the details of those procedures, right? So that's fast. Slow will be, you know, more details given, more justifications given. Yeah. Usually in the hard sciences, you see the fast methods. In the social sciences and humanities, you see the slow methods. Yeah. Okay. So the second metaphor that I want to introduce to you is when reading the method section, we can look at this in terms of source, path, and goal, a journey metaphor. Because the methods essentially describes the journey that the researchers took, right? So the source is like the starting point. Usually in the method section, they will give you an overview of the experimental setup. In Kodabakshi, you see first, the study protocol was approved by, participants gave informed consent before the study, just to get the ethics part out of the way, right? The research ethics, that's taken care of. This trial was a randomized, controlled, open-label clinical trial open to breast cancer patients with, and then some details. The study was conducted where and when. So all your 5 WH questions kind of sort of more or less answered there. And then there will be some information about the materials. Okay, if it's a test that's used or some equipment that's used, you can also see it there. Or maybe even variables, you know, like your dependent, independent variables, they'll be mentioned here. So in this study, this is the one where they talked a little bit about the KD. What is, you know, included in the KD, in the ketogenic diet, consists of this, this, and this. Right? And then the subjects. Who are the subjects? How old are they? What exclusion criteria, etc., etc. Yeah. So the source, information about who's involved, when, where, so on. Then comes the path. Path is the means to the end, right? The steps that are taken, including stats, not just the data collection, but also data analysis, in other words. So here you've got as you will know, the passive is often used, right? But sometimes the authors will also use the active voice. Okay, so this is the path. You've got things like using a block balance randomization method, patients were assigned. This is the passive, passive were assigned. Then comes the active. The project coordinator enrolled the participants. Okay, dietitian provided this. So we may want to ask, why not the passive voice here? Why suddenly they switch to the active voice? Well, perhaps to lend credibility again, like they weren't just assigned by anybody, but by the project coordinator. Okay, so some form of control there. The nutritional counseling wasn't given by anybody. We want to let you know our study is rigorous, right? So I need to tell you the dietitian did it. Okay, so the entire section in Kodabashi, all the way to statistical analysis, that will come under path. And then the goal, although they didn't say specifically we collected this and this, from the description of the path, you know that the data collected were questionnaire and interview data and also fasting blood samples. Right? So with this in mind, then the method section becomes clearer. This is how information is organized and why it's organized this way in telling this story. Okay? So because it's an explanation, the methods will focus on means, right? Means. So we've got means purpose and means result. Means purpose will be telling you we did this because we want to do this, because of certain purpose. And linguistically, the language features used will be something like to further enhance, to do this, in order to do this, or for better tolerance. So this indicates the purpose. Means result, to show how a particular result was achieved. So dietary compliance was checked by assessing. Okay? So by assessing this is your means. The result is dietary compliance was checked. Okay, so in explaining, the steps taken, authors will do either this, talk about the purpose, talk about the result. Okay, so I'm coming almost to the end, just talking about the coherence and cohesion. In order for the authors to kind of gel, information together, they do various things. They make use of repetition or synonyms. Okay, so you see, for example, patients in the control group instructed follow a standard diet. The term diet is repeated, maybe in a different form, dietary. Yeah, Pearson correlation, and then to estimate association. So correlation and association, kind of repetition. It's a feature that we call amplification, just to connect information. Chronology, of course, because it's methods, chronological words that are used, like firstly, then, past tense. But in Kodabashi, they didn't use any of these linking words. Okay? You can see though, using a block balance randomization methods, patients were assigned. So it cannot be the other way. You cannot assign, You cannot assign a patient to something before you randomize them, right? So the arrangement of information in the sentence tells us that this is about chronology. And then there's temporal overlap, words like at the same time, simultaneously. Same thing, Kodabashi didn't use, he and his friends didn't use this, but from the terms that are used throughout, we can see at 6 weeks at the end of the intervention, at baseline, at 6 weeks at the end of the study, we can see there's this overlapping, things that are happening at the same time. So it's in a way simultaneously. Okay, so these are ways in which authors, use to achieve coherence, logical development, as well as cohesion. And finally, you've got tenses, past tenses, also to show, of course, chronology. Okay, to show that the step has been completed, or the present tense. So here you've got one example from Kodabashi. Patients were encouraged to use medium chain MCT oil and odorless and tasteless saturated fat does not require. So from the past tense, it's shifted to the present tense because this is a fact. This fact about this oil does not change. right? So the present tense here signals the author's explanation of why they use this particular oil. Yeah, and then you also have passive voice, which, as I said, tells you about the action more than the doer. Okay, so the action is more important than the doer. Yeah. So I hope that helps with the explaining voice stance. Then the first two sections, I'll hand the time to Kenneth.
Thank you, Vivian. Right. So moving along, my part here is really to talk about the results and discussion, and then the conclusion sections, really, which is the mainstay of any research article. So here I think we could have an overview of the kind of purposes of the results and discussion. Besides the fact that it probably takes up the most in terms of word count, it addresses or answers the research questions, right? And it also talks about the data that was being collected. So there are actually two things that it will talk about really in general, and that will be highlighting and reporting the results, then followed by commenting on the results. So these are the moves or the structure as detailed by Young and Ellison, who are genre analysts. So we have, as you can see, basically 5 moves here that's being identified. So these moves are what we would say recurring patterns, like what my colleague Dr. Lee was talking about. So, so what we will see is that perhaps we may have authors coming in to give some more background information, all right? Although it could be reiterated information, followed by reporting results, summarizing results, commenting on the results, and then finally to summarize the study. I just want to go quickly to move one background information. What I have highlighted in yellow is information that's reiterated. This information was already presented in the methods section, but sometimes the authors would choose to reiterate it because of the significance in contextualizing the results. In this case here, this particular study, which is a randomized controlled trial by Kodabashi et al., he wanted to stress, the authors wanted to stress really the participants, right? In this case here, there are breast cancer female patients who have otherwise no other health issues. So, and I think that's good to stress on that, because that helps to contextualize really the results for readers like us. What is highlighted in green would be information that's new, really, all right, to build on what was reiterated. And it's interesting that they place it here in the results rather than the method section, isn't it? And I think really it's because they really want to impress on the reader that the results is, in this case here, I would say the participants, not all of them were actually included in the results. Okay, so, and what are the specific reasons for it? The next we want to talk about really is the verbs, and like what my colleague Dr. Lee was talking about, verbs are being used rhetorically or persuasively. In this case here, I would say if you look at the first example here, are shown in tables 2, 3, 4, and then the next one is shown. Now this is not, I would say, the rhetorical or persuasive sense, but rather this is like an interactive sense. All right, as if when you are reading, the authors are like just standing next to you, directing your attention to the relevant visuals. So this, so moving along, you notice that for us, we notice in health science, I would say the tendency is not to use verbs to refer to visuals, but rather verbless references. So they see the majority of it would be these following here, right? Where we have, just simply stating the tables or figures, all right? Either in parentheses or without parentheses. Now, moving very quickly, reporting results, very, very straightforward. As you can see, highlighting the key results that you can actually infer from, or should I say, observe in the visuals. I just want to move, yeah, and then followed by summarizing results. Okay. Now this is the interesting part, move 4, because this is when you need to comment on the results, right? And you notice in this case here, I want to show that actually these two steps, interpreting results and comparing results with literature, were actually accomplished, all right, simultaneously. Here, for example, the very first line, results of a systematic review, all right, with a meta-analysis, indicates to us that there is empirical backing, right? This is based on what previous studies have shown. And then they want to say that, really this is consistency between previous studies and the findings of this particular study. Now, on top of that, you notice that all those that are highlighted, those words that are highlighted, these are the hedges that Dr. Lee has talked to you previously, that helps to moderate knowledge claims. I mean, this would strengthen your position, because now readers will find it harder to dispute your findings with your acknowledgement that there can be reservations or perhaps contrary evidence that may occur, or either in future or may not have noticed, right? Now, and next one, I think very quickly, this is just basic to show that there is a difference between previous findings and your finding, and what is the explanation that you need to give to account for that difference. And you can see that hedges, like in this case here, may tend to co-occur, right, with it. But this evaluating results is just to impress on the reader what is the contribution or the key merit of this particular study. In this case here, the authors want to stress the novelty and the fact that their study is in a way a pioneering study. So the stress is on the first, right? This is the first randomized controlled trial, really, to examine the effects of ketogenic diet on quality of life in breast cancer patients. Now, this is if you look at the research article, you notice that the conclusion is very short, very brief, and the reason is because conclusion, elements of it actually can overlap with the discussion of results. So there can be instances where the research article may not have a distinct section called conclusion, but rather what is supposed to be done in conclusion is already accomplished in the general discussion. And basically, these are some of the functions, all right, to remind us of what the research aims are, a summary of the findings, evaluation of the importance, all right, and significance of the study, practical applications, and followed by recommendations for future research. I just want to show you, you don't have to really look at the small words, but you notice that the shape is the opposite of what we saw in the introduction, right? It was an inverted pyramid, where you go from general to specific. Now in this case here, we flip it, all right, it becomes from specific to general. In this case here, for conclusion, the information starts from the opposite direction, all right, compared to the introduction. So I just want to talk about some of the moves in the conclusion that do not overlap with the general discussion. And in this case here, yes, we noticed that the findings were summarized in the discussion, yes, but if you look at this a bit closely, all right, it does something more, all right, and I highlighted in green here that it highlighted this particular knowledge claim that this study does not bring additional benefit about quality of life and physical activity at the 12th week. So there's this caveat, you see, that the authors give. So it's not just as a mere summary, but it does highlight a certain, I would say, you can call it a limitation, maybe you can call it a caveat, all right? And here we have a more explicit presentation of the study's limitations, all right? As you can clearly see here, two being spelled out. And last but not least, we have practical implications and recommendations where the authors would highlight, how this study can be used in clinical settings like hospitals, or in this case here, that perhaps a ketogenic diet can be really useful, all right, with breast cancer patients. And you notice that it tends to be hedged as well, with all the words that in yellow that's highlighted are hedges. But last but not least is the recommendation for future research, right? So you see that. So I just want to show you this diagram again, really, to what Dr. Lee has presented is the whole picture from start to finish of a research article, and we notice that it's the structure, I would say, are detailed by the language features that we see, isn't it? And I think that's very important because it helps us really to not only to decode what we can read, because research articles can be quite a challenge, isn't it, to make sense of it. So in this case here, when we pay more attention to the structure based on what we know on genres, because these are what you call recurring patterns, isn't it? And it helps us to make sense of what we read, as well as helping us to structure our own writing. Should we, as novice writers or research article writers, should pay attention to. Okay, and these are our references. Thank you very much, everyone.